Stay with me, because in less than 10 minutes, one moment inside a courthouse would change for lives forever. The sharp sound of high heels tapped across the marble floor of Franklin County Courthouse in Chicago, bouncing off cold walls and polished stone like a countdown nobody could hear yet. Sarah Bennett tightened her hand around the leather strap of her purse and inhaled slowly through her nose. 8 months pregnant, 29 years old, exhausted beyond words, she stood beneath fluorescent lights that washed every face in pale shades of gray. Her other hand rested gently against the curve of her stomach where her baby daughter shifted softly, almost like she sensed her mother's nervous heartbeat. Sarah forced herself to breathe. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The same breathing exercise her doctor taught her after warning that stress could become dangerous this late in pregnancy. Around her, courthouse life moved with mechanical rhythm. Lawyers hurried past carrying folders and coffee cups. Security officers exchanged quiet conversations. Elevator bells chimed somewhere down the hallway. The smell of old paper mixed with disinfectant and polished wood floated through the air. Everything felt ordinary. Too ordinary. That was the strange part. Because Sarah Bennett was standing less than 20 feet away from the room where her marriage would officially collapse forever. 3 years earlier, Richard Collins had once looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. 3 years earlier, he kissed her forehead before work and called her his lucky charm. 3 years earlier, Sarah believed happy endings happened outside movies. Now Richard was somewhere inside this building preparing for a divorce hearing while standing beside another woman. Funny how life could tear itself apart without making any noise at all. Sarah lowered herself carefully onto a wooden bench and glanced at her phone. No new messages. No missed calls. No one asking if she was okay. Her fingers tightened slightly. Then she heard it. Click, click, click. High heels. Slow. Confident. Deliberate. Sarah already knew that sound before she looked up. Vanessa Harper appeared at the end of the hallway with the confidence of someone arriving at a celebration instead of a courtroom. Blonde hair rested perfectly on her shoulders without a strand out of place. A cream-colored designer coat hung over her frame, and her smile carried that polished look some people mastered when they wanted to appear kind while meaning something entirely different. Beside her walked Richard Collins in a navy suit worth more than Sarah's monthly rent. He adjusted his watch while checking messages on his phone, barely looking up. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Not because she still loved him. That part had broken months ago. No, this feeling was different. It was the strange ache of realizing someone who once promised forever could suddenly look at you like a stranger standing in line at a grocery store. Vanessa spotted Sarah immediately. Her smile widened. Richard looked up a second later and paused. For one brief moment, guilt flickered across his face. 1 second, maybe less. Then it disappeared. Sarah felt her daughter move again beneath her hand. Strong little kicks. Tiny reminders that she wasn't completely alone. Vanessa tilted her head and smiled as she started walking closer. Richard followed beside her in silence. Somewhere behind Sarah, courtroom doors opened with a heavy groan. Somewhere outside, distant thunder rolled across the city. And for reasons Sarah couldn't explain, a cold feeling settled deep in her chest. Vanessa stopped a few feet in front of Sarah and crossed her arms slowly while studying her the way people look at something sitting in a store window that they have already decided not to buy. The smile on her face remained perfectly in place, but her eyes carried something colder beneath it. Richard stayed beside her, one hand inside his coat pocket, avoiding direct eye contact for longer than Sarah expected. Around them, courthouse traffic continued moving as if the air had not suddenly become heavier. People passed carrying legal folders and coffee cups. A bailiff walked by without looking up. Somewhere down the hallway, a printer began humming. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. But Sarah felt like she was standing in the center of a storm nobody else could see. Vanessa looked down at Sarah's stomach and gave a small laugh. Wow, she said softly. 8 months already. Sarah said nothing. Dr. Lisa Reynolds had given her advice during one of her prenatal appointments 2 weeks earlier. Stress changes everything. Breathe. Stay calm. Protect your peace. Sarah repeated those words silently in her mind now. Protect your peace. Protect your peace. Richard cleared his throat. Sarah. Just her name. No hello. No how are you feeling. No are you okay. Just Sarah. Funny how one word could suddenly sound empty after years of marriage. Sarah looked at him carefully. There had been a time when she knew every expression on his face before he even spoke. There had been a time when she could tell whether he was stressed, happy, worried, or tired just by the way his eyebrows moved. But now she looked at him and saw a stranger wearing Richard Collins's face. "You are early," he finally said. Sarah blinked once. That was it. That was all he had. "Traffic was lighter than I expected," she answered quietly. Vanessa tilted her head and laughed again. "You two sound like co-workers discussing weather." Richard shifted uncomfortably. Sarah noticed it immediately. Good. At least something still reached him. Vanessa sat beside Richard on the opposite bench and adjusted her coat. "You know what is funny?" she said. "I always imagined divorce hearings being dramatic." She looked around the hallway. "This place is kind of boring." Sarah stared at the marble floor. White stone with thin gray veins running through it. Strange what people focus on when they are trying not to cry. Richard rubbed the side of his jaw and finally sat down. He looked tired. Sarah noticed that too. Not physically tired. Something else. Something heavier beneath the surface. For a moment, she wondered if guilt had finally found its way into his life. Then Vanessa reached over and touched his arm lightly, and whatever expression had appeared vanished again. Sarah felt another small movement beneath her hand. Her daughter shifted gently. Tiny movements. Tiny reminders. Sarah smiled without realizing it. Vanessa saw it immediately. "Still smiling?" she asked. "That is impressive." Sarah looked up. "What does that mean?" Vanessa leaned back against the bench. "Nothing. I just think some people hold on to things long after they should let them go." Silence settled between them. Sarah knew exactly what Vanessa wanted. Reaction. Anger. Tears. Anything. But Sarah had spent months crying alone already. She had cried in her apartment. She had cried in grocery store parking lots. She had cried in shower stalls where nobody could hear her. She had no tears left for people like Vanessa Harper. Suddenly, a courthouse door opened farther down the hallway. A woman in a dark gray suit stepped through carrying a leather briefcase. Her auburn hair was pulled neatly behind her shoulders, and her eyes moved through the hallway quickly before stopping on Sarah. The woman's expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Sarah frowned slightly, because for some reason, she had this strange feeling that the woman was looking directly at her. Sarah frowned and looked toward the woman standing across the hallway. She was somewhere in her early 30s, maybe 34 or 35, carrying herself with the calm confidence of someone used to entering difficult rooms without asking permission first. Her charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, and the leather briefcase in her hand looked worn in the way expensive things become after years of use. But it was not her clothes Sarah noticed. It was her eyes. The woman was looking at Sarah with an expression that felt strangely personal, almost as if she had finally located something she had spent hours searching for. Sarah looked behind herself for a second to see if someone else was standing there. Nobody. Just empty hallway space and polished marble walls. The woman started walking toward her. Slow steps. Measured steps. Sarah felt her shoulders tense slightly. Vanessa noticed too. "Looks like somebody knows you," she said with a smirk. Sarah shook her head softly. "I do not think so." Richard lifted his eyes from his phone and looked toward the approaching woman. Almost immediately, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Sarah to notice. His posture straightened. Vanessa looked over at him. "What?" she whispered. Richard stared for another second. "That is Emma Parker." Vanessa blinked. "Who?" Richard looked back toward Sarah. "She is one of the best family attorneys in Chicago." Sarah stared at him. "Attorney?" Richard nodded slowly. "Very expensive attorney." Sarah looked confused. "I never hired an attorney." Richard's eyebrows narrowed. For the first time all morning, uncertainty crossed his face. Emma Parker finally reached them and stopped directly in front of Sarah. Up close, Sarah noticed small details she had missed from farther away. Light freckles beneath professional makeup. Sharp blue eyes. A tiny silver necklace resting near her collarbone. Emma smiled gently. Not the fake kind people wear in elevators or business meetings. A real smile. Warm and calm. "Sarah Bennett?" she asked softly. Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes." Emma extended her hand. "My name is Emma Parker." Sarah shook it carefully. "I know who you are apparently." Emma looked toward Richard for less than a second before returning her attention to Sarah. "Good. Saves us time." Vanessa laughed quietly beside Richard. "Interesting. Emma ignored her completely. She turned back towards Sarah. Can we speak privately for a moment? Sarah stared at her. I am sorry, but I think there is some mistake. Emma's expression softened. No mistake. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Tiny nervous movements fluttered beneath her ribs. Her daughter shifted again. Not hard, just enough to remind Sarah she was there. Emma noticed Sarah's hand instinctively move toward her stomach. Her expression changed slightly. Concern. Real concern. Are you feeling all right? Sarah nodded automatically. I am okay. Emma studied her face for another second, as if deciding whether to believe her. Then she opened her briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. Not thick legal paperwork. Just a single cream-colored file. Sarah stared at it without understanding. Emma looked down at the folder and then back at Sarah. I know this is strange, she said quietly. Actually, strange does not even begin to describe it. Richard stood up now. Emma. His voice sounded firmer than before. What exactly is going on? Emma finally turned toward him. Her eyes became colder immediately. Professional. Controlled. Good morning, Mr. Collins. Richard folded his arms. Why are you here? Emma looked at him for 1 second before answering. I am here because sometimes life surprises people. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. Okay, that was weird. Emma ignored her too. Then she looked back at Sarah and slowly handed her the folder. Sarah hesitated before taking it. On the front, written in dark blue ink, were only 3 words. Sarah Bennett. Confidential. Sarah stared at the folder in her hands as if the blue letters across the front might suddenly rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Sarah Bennett. Confidential. 3 simple words. 3 words that somehow felt heavier than the leather purse hanging from her shoulder. Around her, the courthouse hallway continued breathing with quiet movement. Shoes crossed marble floors. Elevator doors opened and closed. Somewhere nearby, a copier started spitting out sheets of paper with soft mechanical clicks. Life kept moving. But Sarah felt still. Completely still. Emma folded her hands calmly in front of herself and waited. She did not rush. She did not push. She simply watched Sarah with an expression that looked almost familiar, though Sarah could not understand why. Richard narrowed his eyes. Emma, I asked you a question. Emma glanced at him briefly. I heard you. Richard exhaled sharply. Sarah had seen that expression before. During business dinners. During arguments with employees. During moments when Richard realized something was happening outside his control. He hated not understanding situations. Hated it. Vanessa stood up beside him and crossed her arms. Can somebody explain what this little mystery act is supposed to be? She asked. Emma looked directly at her for the first time. Her face remained perfectly neutral. I will explain things when they concern you. Vanessa blinked once. Sarah almost missed it. Almost. But she saw it. That tiny shift in confidence. Small. Very small. Still there. Sarah looked back at the folder in her hands. Her fingers traced along the edge slowly. I do not understand, she finally whispered. Emma stepped slightly closer and lowered her voice. You are not supposed to understand yet. Sarah looked up at her immediately. What does that mean? Emma inhaled slowly before answering. It means some stories start long before we realize we are inside them. Sarah stared at her without speaking. Somewhere deep inside her chest, uneasiness began moving slowly like cold water. She did not know why. She did not know what exactly felt wrong. But something did. Something definitely did. Her daughter shifted beneath her ribs again. Sarah placed her hand against her stomach automatically and breathed in. Protect your peace. Protect your peace. Emma noticed the movement again. Her eyes softened for just a second. How far along are you? She asked quietly. 33 weeks. Emma nodded slowly. Okay. Sarah frowned. Okay, what? Emma looked toward the courtroom doors farther down the hallway before looking back at her. Nothing. Just making sure. Richard took a step forward now. His patience was disappearing. Sarah knew the signs. The tightening jaw. The folded arms. The controlled voice that became colder each second. Sarah, he said carefully. You do not know this woman. Sarah looked at him. I know that. Then maybe you should stop accepting random files from strangers inside courthouses. Vanessa smiled immediately. Finally, something intelligent. Emma looked at Richard calmly. Interesting. Richard stared at her. What is interesting? Emma tilted her head slightly. You are worried. Richard gave a short laugh. I am not worried. Emma held his eyes another second. Right. Silence dropped between them. Thick silence. the kind that makes people suddenly aware of air conditioning sounds and distant footsteps. Sarah looked back down at the folder. Something caught her attention. A small date printed near the bottom corner beneath her name. She frowned immediately. August 14th, 1997. Her birthday. Sarah froze. Completely froze. Her breathing slowed. Because she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had never written her birthday anywhere on the outside of any legal document. Sarah stared at the date for several seconds without blinking. August 14th, 1997. Her birthday. The fluorescent lights above suddenly felt brighter somehow, colder somehow. Tiny sounds from around the courthouse grew strangely sharp in her ears. The squeak of shoes against marble. The rustle of legal papers. A cough from somewhere near the elevators. Sarah looked up slowly at Emma. How do you know that date? Her voice came out softer than she intended. Emma did not answer immediately. She looked at Sarah the way people look at someone standing at the edge of a door they are not ready to open yet. Open the folder, Emma finally said quietly. Sarah looked back down. Her fingers tightened around the cream-colored file. Suddenly, she did not want to open it anymore. Strange how curiosity and fear sometimes feel exactly the same. Richard took another step forward. Sarah. His voice carried warning now. Do not do this. Sarah looked at him. Do what? Richard opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time all morning, he looked uncertain. Not irritated. Not annoyed. Uncertain. Vanessa looked between everyone and sighed dramatically. Okay, this is becoming ridiculous. She folded her arms and shifted her weight onto one heel. Seriously, what is inside that thing? Secret lottery numbers. Emma still ignored her. Sarah noticed something else now. Emma had barely looked at Vanessa since arriving. Not once. Almost as if she had already decided Vanessa did not matter. Sarah slowly opened the folder. The paper inside felt heavier than normal paper should have felt. Her eyes moved across the first page, then stopped. Adoption records. Sarah blinked once, then twice. Her breathing slowed. Adoption records. She stared harder. Maybe she read it wrong. Maybe stress was affecting her. Maybe pregnancy exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. But the words remained exactly where they were. Her eyes moved lower. Child name, Sarah Marie Bennett. Date of birth, August 14th, 1997. Status, sealed records. Sarah felt cold move through her chest. Not outside cold. Inside cold. The kind that starts beneath your ribs. No, she whispered automatically. Her eyes moved across the page again. No, no, no. That could not be right. Her parents never said anything. Never once. Sarah looked up at Emma immediately. This is wrong. Emma's expression did not change. I wish it were. Sarah shook her head quickly. No. Her voice became stronger. No, my parents. Her words stopped suddenly. Because something appeared inside her mind. A memory. Small. Quiet. Forgotten for years. She was maybe 10 years old standing in her parents' kitchen. She remembered asking why there were no baby pictures before age 2 in the family albums. She remembered her mother freezing for half a second before smiling and saying the boxes had been lost during a move. Sarah remembered believing her. Why would she not? Parents do not lie about things like that, do they? Her daughter shifted beneath her ribs again. Sarah placed her hand against her stomach automatically. Suddenly breathing felt harder. Emma stepped closer immediately. Sarah. Her voice remained calm. Look at me. Sarah looked up slowly. Breathe. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Sarah followed automatically. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Emma watched carefully. Good. Richard stared at the papers from several feet away. Sarah noticed color slowly disappearing from his face. Vanessa looked confused now. Actually confused. Wait, she said slowly. Adoption records? Nobody answered her. Sarah looked back at the papers again. Her hands were shaking now. Then she noticed something else. A second document beneath the first page. Only partially visible. A hospital form. And beneath one printed line was a name she had never seen before in her life. William Bennett. Sarah stared at the name for so long that the letters themselves began losing meaning. William Bennett. 2 ordinary words sitting on a hospital document as if they belonged there. As if they had always belonged there. But they did not. Sarah knew every name connected to her life. She knew family birthdays. She knew old neighbors. She knew childhood teachers and cousins and distant relatives she only saw at Christmas gatherings. William Bennett was not one of them. Her fingers tightened around the papers. the edges bent slightly beneath her hand. "Who is William Bennett?" she whispered. Nobody answered immediately. Emma looked at her quietly. Richard stared at the documents without blinking. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him and folded her arms tighter across her chest. Sarah looked up again. "Emma." Her voice became stronger this time. "Who is William Bennett?" Emma inhaled slowly and glanced toward the courtroom doors down the hallway. Sarah followed her eyes automatically. Large wooden doors stood beneath brass lettering polished so clean that light reflected from them. People walked in and out carrying files and legal folders. Ordinary movement. Ordinary courthouse life. But suddenly Sarah noticed something she had missed before. Small gold letters mounted beside the courtroom entrance. Presiding Judge, William Bennett. Sarah felt every thought inside her head stop at once. Completely stop. No sounds. No movement. Nothing. For one strange second, even breathing felt forgotten. Then reality rushed back all at once. Air conditioning humming overhead. Footsteps crossing marble floors. Elevator bells ringing somewhere farther away. Her own heartbeat pounding inside her chest. No. No. That was impossible. Sarah looked at Emma immediately. No. Emma did not speak. Sarah shook her head quickly. No. Her voice became louder. No, that cannot. She stopped herself. Because suddenly pieces began moving inside her mind. Tiny pieces. Small moments from earlier that morning. Emma recognizing her immediately. Emma asking how far along her pregnancy was. Emma arriving before the hearing started. The confidential folder. The birthday. The adoption papers. Suddenly none of it felt random anymore. Richard stepped forward. "Sarah." His voice sounded different now. Less controlled. Less certain. Sarah barely looked at him. Her eyes remained locked on Emma. "Tell me I am wrong." Emma looked down briefly. Just 1 second. Then back up again. Sarah noticed something unexpected. Sadness. Real sadness. "Sarah," Emma said softly, "there are things inside those documents that need to be explained carefully." Sarah felt her daughter move again beneath her ribs. Strong movement this time. Almost impatient. Almost like a tiny reminder to breathe. Sarah pressed her hand gently against her stomach and inhaled slowly. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. But breathing felt harder now. Because questions were appearing faster than answers. Why would a judge's name appear on her records? Why had nobody told her anything? Why today? Why now? Vanessa suddenly laughed once. Short and awkward. "Okay." She looked around at everyone. "I seriously feel like I walked into some weird daytime television show." Nobody reacted. Nobody even looked at her. Her smile slowly disappeared. Richard rubbed his jaw and stared toward the courtroom doors. Sarah had seen him nervous before. During business negotiations. During investment meetings. During moments involving money. But this was different. This looked almost like fear. Then a deep voice echoed from farther down the hallway. "Courtroom 7 will begin seating in 5 minutes." People around them immediately started gathering papers and moving toward the doors. Lawyers stood. Clients adjusted jackets. Conversations lowered into nervous whispers. Sarah looked toward the entrance again. Presiding Judge, William Bennett. And suddenly she felt something she had not felt all morning. Not sadness. Not anger. Something else. Something colder. Because for reasons she could not explain, Sarah suddenly had the terrifying feeling that when those courtroom doors opened, her life was going to split into before and after. The heavy wooden courtroom doors opened with a slow groan that seemed louder than everything else in the hallway. Conversations faded almost immediately. Lawyers straightened jackets. People gathered files against their chests and began moving forward in quiet lines. Sarah remained frozen for a second. Her eyes stayed fixed on the brass letters beside the entrance. Presiding Judge, William Bennett. The name felt different now. Not just words on a plaque. Not just another person in a black robe behind a courtroom bench. William Bennett suddenly felt like a question standing in front of her. Emma stepped beside Sarah and lowered her voice. "Can you walk?" Sarah blinked and looked at her. "What?" Emma glanced towards Sarah's stomach with quiet concern. "Can you walk?" Sarah stared at her for another second before realizing she had not moved at all. Her feet felt strangely heavy, almost like her body had forgotten instructions it had followed every day for 29 years. She looked down and took a breath. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Her daughter shifted beneath her ribs again. Strong movement. Tiny life. Tiny reminder. Keep going. Sarah nodded once. Yes. Emma offered her hand. Sarah looked at it for half a second before accepting. Not because she completely trusted Emma. Not yet. But because suddenly Emma felt like the only stable thing inside a morning that no longer made sense. Richard walked ahead without saying anything. Vanessa stayed beside him but looked noticeably quieter now. Sarah noticed she kept glancing back toward Emma and then toward the courtroom doors. Confidence still sat on Vanessa's face, but something else had joined it now. Uneasiness. People entered courtroom 7 one by one. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Sunlight filtered through tall windows along one side of the room, stretching pale rectangles across dark carpeting. Rows of benches faced the front where the judge's bench stood elevated above everything else. Sarah had expected coldness. She had expected something intimidating. Instead, the room felt strangely calm. Too calm, like standing outside during the few quiet minutes before a storm arrives. Emma guided Sarah toward the front row. Richard and Vanessa sat several feet away with Richard's attorney, James Holloway, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes and a navy suit that looked expensive enough to pay somebody's mortgage. James leaned toward Richard immediately and whispered something into his ear. Richard frowned, then glanced toward Sarah, then toward Emma. Sarah noticed his expression tighten. Good. Let him wonder. She had spent months wondering things alone. Sarah lowered herself carefully into her seat. The baby shifted again. She smiled faintly and rested her hand against her stomach. Easy there, sweetheart, she whispered quietly. Emma sat beside her and opened her briefcase. Sarah looked over immediately. More documents. More files. More questions. Sarah stared at her. Tell me something. Emma looked up. What? Sarah lowered her voice. Did you know before today? Emma stopped moving completely. For 1 second, she did not answer. Then she slowly closed the folder in front of her. I found certain things 3 weeks ago. Sarah stared at her. 3 weeks. Emma nodded carefully. Sarah felt another strange sensation move through her chest. 3 weeks. Someone had known something about her life for 3 weeks while she walked around completely unaware. 3 weeks while she bought baby clothes and prepared a nursery and cried herself to sleep over divorce papers. 3 weeks. Suddenly the courtroom door behind them opened again. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Sarah turned too. Then her breathing caught. Because an older man with silver hair had just entered the courtroom wearing black judicial robes. And the moment his eyes lifted toward the room, they stopped directly on her. Sarah forgot how to breathe for a second. The older man standing near the courtroom entrance had silver hair brushed neatly away from his forehead and the kind of posture that came from decades of authority. He was not physically intimidating. He did not need to be. Some people carried quiet gravity around them like weather. Judge William Bennett adjusted the sleeve beneath his robe and took a few steps forward toward the bench, but then something unusual happened. He stopped. Completely stopped. Sarah noticed it immediately because everybody else kept moving while he remained still. Court staff continued organizing papers. Attorneys gathered folders. People settled into seats. But William Bennett stood motionless, his eyes fixed directly on Sarah. Not generally in her direction. Not vaguely across the room. Directly on her. Sarah felt her pulse begin climbing inside her chest. Around her, sounds suddenly became distant again, as if somebody had lowered the volume of the world. Emma noticed too. Sarah saw her straighten slightly beside her. Richard looked toward the judge and frowned. James Holloway followed Richard's eyes and then slowly narrowed his own. Even Vanessa turned toward the front of the courtroom with visible confusion. William Bennett blinked once. Then again. Sarah could not explain why, but something changed in his expression. It happened quickly, less than a second. Surprise first, then disbelief, then something deeper, something almost painful. He stared at Sarah's face, then lower toward her hand resting protectively against her stomach. Then his eyes moved upward again. Sarah felt cold move through her body. Not fear exactly. Something stranger. Something almost familiar. Then William looked at Emma. Just one look. No words. But Sarah saw it happen. Emma gave the smallest nod in the world. Barely noticeable. Barely movement at all. But Sarah saw it. And suddenly the uneasiness that had followed her all morning became something larger. Because Emma and the judge had just communicated without speaking. William turned away and continued walking toward the bench. His steps seemed slower now. Deliberate. Measured. He sat down and adjusted papers in front of him, though Sarah noticed his attention drifting back toward her twice in less than 10 seconds. The bailiff stood beside the bench. All rise. Chairs shifted instantly across the courtroom. Everyone stood. Sarah pushed herself carefully upward, one hand pressing against the bench for support. Her lower back ached slightly now, and exhaustion was beginning to settle into her shoulders. The baby shifted again beneath her ribs. Strong movement. Emma leaned closer immediately. Are you okay? Sarah nodded automatically, even though she was no longer sure what okay even meant. Everyone sat again. William cleared his throat and looked down at the paperwork in front of him. Good morning. His voice was calm and steady. Years of courtroom authority lived inside it. We are here today regarding the Collins divorce proceeding. Sarah stared at him. William Bennett. The name still echoed through her head. William Bennett. Adoption records. Hospital documents. Birthday records. Questions kept stacking one on top of another until Sarah barely knew where to place them anymore. William began reviewing procedural information, but Sarah realized something strange after a few moments. He had repeated one sentence twice. Tiny mistake. Small mistake. Probably nobody else noticed. Nobody except Sarah and Emma. William looked down at his papers briefly, then back up. His eyes found Sarah again. Then suddenly, he stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Complete silence settled across the courtroom. Richard looked up immediately. James Holloway frowned. Vanessa blinked in confusion. William stared directly at Sarah with an expression Sarah could not understand. Then very slowly, he removed his glasses and whispered 6 words that nobody in that courtroom expected to hear. Emma, is that really her? The entire courtroom went silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that feels too heavy to belong inside a room full of people. Even the faint hum from the air conditioning above suddenly seemed louder. Sarah stared at Judge William Bennett without blinking. Emma slowly stood beside her seat. No rush. No panic. Just slow movement. Deliberate movement. She looked toward the bench and nodded once. Yes, she said quietly. It is her. Sarah felt the words hit somewhere deep inside her chest. It is her. Not I think. Not maybe. Not possibly. It is her. Richard looked at Emma immediately. What exactly is happening? James Holloway turned toward the bench with visible confusion written across his face. Vanessa looked between everyone with widening eyes. Wait, she said. Wait a second. William Bennett lowered his head and closed his eyes briefly. Sarah noticed his hand tighten around the edge of the bench. Then he looked back up at her. But something was different now. The expression of a judge had disappeared. The authority was still there. The posture was still there. But something softer had appeared beneath it. Something human. Something almost fragile. Sarah felt her pulse climbing again. I do not understand, she whispered. Emma looked toward her carefully. Sarah, there was a hospital fire 29 years ago. Sarah stared at her. Emma continued quietly. Records were lost. Families were separated. Multiple investigations followed, but some files remained sealed because of ongoing legal disputes involving guardianship and custody. Sarah looked down at the papers still sitting in her lap. Adoption records. Birth records. Hospital forms. Pieces. Small disconnected pieces suddenly trying to become one picture. William finally spoke again, but his voice sounded different now. Lower. Less formal. For 28 years, he said quietly, I searched for a little girl who disappeared from my life before I ever had the chance to know her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes before she even realized it was happening. Richard stared at William, then at Sarah, then back at Emma. Sarah had never seen him look completely lost before. Not once in 3 years. Vanessa slowly sat down without saying a word. Emma reached into her briefcase one more time and removed a small photograph. She handed it carefully to Sarah. Sarah looked down. A little girl. Maybe 2 years old. Blonde hair. Bright eyes. Small smile. Sarah froze. Her heart skipped once. Because she knew that face. Not from memory. From somewhere else. From an old photograph sitting inside her apartment living room. A picture her mother always kept framed near the fireplace. Sarah looked back up slowly. William Bennett was no longer looking at legal documents. He was looking at her. Only her. Sarah felt another movement beneath her ribs. Strong movement. Her daughter. She smiled through tears without understanding why. Suddenly she realized something. For months she thought she had been losing everything. Her marriage. her future, her stability. She thought this courthouse would become the place where her life collapsed. But sometimes life hides strange things inside broken moments. Sometimes doors close because others are opening somewhere you cannot see yet. Sarah looked toward William. He looked back at her. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Then very slowly, William stood from behind the bench and removed his glasses. His eyes had become red around the edges now. He looked at Sarah and gave the smallest smile she had ever seen. Not a judge's smile. Not a stranger's smile. A father's smile. And for the first time that entire morning, Sarah no longer felt alone.